Recently, I saw this headline of an article that said something like, "This guy proves that people can feel the future," or something like ESP is real and people are predicting the future and science proved it, or something like that. So I'm going to look into it. So the name of the guy in the article was Daryl Bem. So let's search feeling the future. Let's see. Let's try this one. Cornell Chronicle. Study shows that humans have some psychic power caps. So this is the guy. This is a really poor picture of this poor guy. After 8 or 9 years of study with more than 1,000 participants, he shows that humans can have some ability to anticipate the future. Out of all of the forms of ESP or psi, precognition has always intrigued me the most. What do these stand for? ESP? What is that? Psi? What is that? ESP. Extrasensory perception, according to Betsy. So his study is going to be published in the American Psychological Association's Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Wow, that's a mouthful. Next year. Okay, so this is before everything. He first became interested in this topic when he was asked to find flaws in one psi researcher's extrasensory study, and he couldn't find any flaws. What the heck is psi? Surprisingly, it looks like it's not that. I'm not going to get an easy answer, which is a little bit frustrating. It looks like it might be psychic, psi, or psychic. Why would it be PSI? This one is also saying psi for psychic. Oh well. Anyways, he said the research is specifically targeting his fellow social psychologists. He designed the experiments to be easy to replicate, it looks like. So his goal was to take well-known phenomena in psychology and reverse their time course. What does that mean? Instead of just taking a stimulus and measuring the response, he was measuring the response before the stimulus was presented. One way earlier experimenters were doing this was hooking them up to psychological measuring equipment and then measuring their emotional arousal levels. They would sit before a computer and watch random selected images that were either erotic or very negative, like bloody CSI images. The goal is that when you see one of those kind of pictures, your physiology will jump after watching a series of landscape or neutral pictures. But the finding is that your physiology jumps before the picture has actually appeared on screen, even before the computer has decided which picture to show you. So in one experiment, the participants were given a list of words and then given a test where they tried to retype as many of the words as they could remember, and then a computer randomly selected words from the list and gave the participants practice exercises on them after they had taken the test. When the earlier memory test results were checked, it was found that they had remembered more of the words than they were to practice later than words they were not going to practice. The practice exercises had reached back in time to help them. Well, that's trippy. That's just like hard to wrap my brain around. What is he saying? So they took the test and then were given a bunch of random words from that test to practice after the fact. And then when they went back and looked at how accurate they were based on like their whole score, the words that they did better on were those words that they had practiced later. All but 9 of the experiments confirmed that psi exists. Bem thinks the odds of these being flukes are 74 billion to 1. Bem has authored a lot of interesting experiments throughout his career. There was one on telepathy. He conducted these experiments because he really feels like precognition is real. He was optimistic when he went in. He said, "It's one thing to go into your research optimistic, it's another thing to actually see it work." That's funny. Let's see if we can do more digging and find some more details. Daryl Bem, experiment explained. Big think. Are psi phenomena real? How a controversial study on psychic powers caused a revolution in psychology research. It caused a revolution? What's that? This is saying that this paper was among the most controversial paper that has come out among scientific studies. The fact that he published this paper set off a period of soul searching among psychologists. So they want to know, could these experiments that follow accepted procedures and sound methods be replicated? The paper, Feeling the Future, Experimental Evidence for Anomalous Retroactive Influences on Cognition and Effect. Yikes. Is that the title of his paper? Yeah, let's actually just look at it for a second. APA PsychNet. This looks like a book title. Is this the abstract? I don't think so. I'll come back to this because I do want to look at it. Stuff we already know. So in the actual experiment, the subjects were looking at a computer with a pair of curtains on it. They were supposed to guess which curtain had the pornographic image hidden behind it, with the correct answer being chosen randomly after the student had made their decision. So if there's a computer screen with 2 curtains and you say, is it behind the curtain on the left or the right? And they say left. And then the computer decides, okay, random generation of which side it's on. And then it shows it to them. So I'm assuming all of this is being kept very carefully keeping track of all this very carefully. Students performed slightly better than simply guessing, 53% choosing the correct location of the image. So this guy, Chris Chambers, is saying it's ridiculous that he came to this conclusion, and yet it's interesting because if you do everything normal and properly and you end up getting this ridiculous conclusion, how many other papers are following these exact same methods and are similarly flawed because they came to these ridiculous conclusions? This is actually interesting because Bem is encouraging experts to try and replicate these experiments for themselves. He's not like, it doesn't seem like he's like hiding his methods or trying to be secretive about this. It sounds like he's like, do it again. Like, I did it once, you should do it too, to like kind of verify my findings, which I feel like isn't a very common attitude among scientists. He had free packages with detailed instruction manuals, requisite computer software for running the sessions and analyzing the data. So other scientists are trying to replicate it. In 2010, there was a study carried out in Berkeley. They used an online version of Bem's word recall experiment, but they failed to come up with the same outcome with a sample group of over 100 people. Bem didn't like this and said that it wasn't going to work online, which is kind of a funny thing to say. Why does he not think it would work online? These people also couldn't replicate his findings and took issue with the statistical analysis he used. They thought he overstated his evidence. But there are studies that replicated what Bem found. There was a meta-analysis done from 33 different labs in 14 countries with 12,000 participants included in all of the different studies. Bem thinks that all of these reports are yielding decisive evidence in favor of ESP. So this guy, Jonathan Schooler, thinks that the biases of the experimenter may have a lot to do with the possible success of the studies. Bem acknowledges that he has put psychologists in an uncomfortable position, so they either have to revise their views of the physical world or their views on research practice. It sounds like he might have been intending to do this. He did it on purpose. He says he still believes inside, but he also thinks that the methods in the field need to be cleaned up. So this is sounding more and more like kind of an attack on psychology, like the field of psychology. Not an attack, but like, what do they call that when it's like a stop and think moment? A reckoning. So Bem's paper prompted a call to replicate, not just his study, but psychology studies in general. If an outlandish result is achieved, it's worth verifying it can be repeated. The study could have errors, or its results could simply be a fluke. So a group of 270 scientists tried replicating 100 studies from the year 2008. These were all peer-reviewed psychology journal studies with solid reputations. The goal was to repeat all 100 experiments exactly as they were done originally. Only 36% of the replications managed to get the same results as the initial studies. 64% of the studies analyzed were potentially wrong, or at the very least misleading and insufficiently presented. That is a little bit shocking. This sounds like the reproducibility crisis that I keep hearing so much about. Also, if you have 100 experiments, why would you put it in a percentage? 36%. Why could you not just say 36? Because it's 36% out of 100, right? So this is bad news for the field of psychology. So now research are being asked to pre-register, where they have to write up the study and what their hypothesis might be before they carry out their experiments. So this is an attempt to limit their ability to manipulate the data and report positive results before they are found. So some scientific journals are even asking people to publish their registered reports, proof that they had set out with a specific goal before they started. This makes the decision to publish papers focus on their methodologies more than their sensational results. As far as parapsychology goes, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The disputed nature of these studies means that it has not made a real dent on the consensus of scientific opinions. Got to make more reproducible work before dramatic claims are accepted or taken more seriously. Okay, let's go. So it says check out the actual study here. Let's do that. This is that same one from before. Let me look for the actual publication. Okay, I had to poke around a bit, but I'm pretty sure this is it. Can I just say it's so frustrating to me that places like this will put it behind a paywall, but then I just found this like by doing another Google search and it was listed on a different website for free. Like, so frustrating. Okay, so this looks like the abstract, but this doesn't look very helpful. It's just a lot of vague, nonsensory. That's fine. We'll just go over this quickly. Okay, here he's defining psi as denoting anomalous processes of information or energy transfer that are currently unexplained in terms of known physical or biological mechanisms, which would include telepathy, clairvoyance, remote viewing, chokinesis, psychokinesis, precognition, premonition, all these things. Okay, so for the first experiment, he's doing precognitive detection of erotic stimuli. He asked 100 Cornell undergraduates for this experiment. they got 1 point of extra credit, or they were given $5. When was this done? It was published in 2011, and he said it took him 8 years to do all this, so early 2000s. $5 is not a lot in early 2000s. Also, like 1 point of extra credit is not a lot. In the first experiment, women showed those side effects to the arousing stimuli, but men did not. There was 100 sessions, and participants correctly identified the future positions more frequently than the 50%. There was 53.1% correctly identified. Experiment number 2, precognitive avoidance of negative stimuli. This one had 150 Cornell undergrads, flashed pictures for 33 milliseconds, followed immediately by a masking stimulus for 167. Whenever the participant had indicated a preference for the target to be, the computer flashed a positively valenced picture on the screen subliminally 3 times. Participants were seated in front of the computer and asked to respond to the 2 items, followed by 3 minutes of relaxation period. Then on each of the trials, participants was shown a low arousal, effectively neutral picture, and its mirror image side by side. Asked to press one of 2 keys on the keyboard to indicate which neutral picture he or she liked better. The computer then randomly designated one of the 2 pictures to be the target. The computer did not determine which of the 2 neural pictures would be the target until after the participant had registered his or her preference. Let's keep going. Results. It looks like this one didn't pan out. Maybe this is the one everybody keeps talking about as the 8 out of 9. The one that didn't work out. Experiment 3, retroactive priming. 1. Shown a picture, asked to press one of 2 keys on the keyboard as quickly as they could to indicate if the picture was pleasant or unpleasant. Results. Very confusing results. 60.8% produced a positive retroactive priming effect. I don't think I looked at this one correctly. Experiment 4 was retroactive priming 2. There's a bunch of tables and charts here I'm not understanding. Experiment 5 was retroactive habituation. Experiment 6. So each of these experiments that he's going through are like full studies that he's doing. He's just publishing like little blurbs here that are kind of explaining what the experiment was, the results, and the discussion, and doesn't look like he's giving a conclusion. But experiment 8, facilitation of recall. This is the one where they're typing out all the words as a test. But this one says the experiment is run completely by the computer and takes about 20 minutes. So why would this not be able to be done online? I feel like sending this to somebody online and asking them to do it would seem like reasonable. Experiment 9. Replication packages are available on request for Macintosh and Windows to encourage and facilitate replication of the experiments reported here. I suspect that the experiments on retroactive priming will be easiest to replicate successfully. More general issues of replication are also pertinent here. So he is like giving pretty explicit instructions on how to redo this, and it seems like he's not like shying away from his methodology or like encouraging people to go through the same process and do what he did. Here's Bem's little note on believing impossible things. Near the end of her encounter with the White Queen, Alice protests that one can't believe impossible things. 34% of academic psychologists would surely agree. The White Queen famously retorted, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I always did it for half an hour a day." Why, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Bem is not advocating for believing impossible things, but maybe this article will prompt academic psychologists to raise probabilities of believing at least one anomalous thing before breakfast. That's funny. That's a good way to end this paper, Bem. Well played. Okay, let's keep looking and see if we can find other interesting facts that we haven't covered yet. Daryl Bem broke science. Slate magazine. Bem proved ESP is real, which means science is broken. Yikes. What a statement. So this is the story of this Jade Wu, who was a research assistant for Bem. She's there with several other undergraduate women helping out. Wu says that Bem seemed genuine and kind, wasn't trying to convert her to his way of thinking. Bem's been funding this out of his own pocket. Wu believes that the methodology was sound as that of any other psychology experiment. So that study containing all 9 of his experiments were published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, which turns away 85% of all submissions, which kind of begs the question, how did they let this thing through? Why was it published in the first place? It sounds like they kind of accept things based on the methods, not necessarily the findings. His sample sizes were large, he'd use conventional statistical analyses, he'd double and triple check to make sure there was no glitches. So it sounds like he knew that he would be taken seriously because he had gone through all of these things with a significant amount of rigor, more than anyone had before in the field of ESP, I'm assuming they mean. He knew it wouldn't convince the diehard skeptics, but he also knew it couldn't be ignored. So the main things that the psychologists reading this paper, their dilemma is, Like we said before, if you buy the results of the paper, you'd be admitting that what you understood about the universe was wrong, that things like ESP are real. If you reject the findings of the paper, you'd be admitting something almost as momentous, that the standard methods of psychology cannot be trusted, and that much of what gets published in the field, and thus much of what we think and understand about the mind, could be totally bunk, which is a tricky place to be. Oh, here we go. They talk about the replication crisis. So they feel like this was the single moment that set off the replication crisis. The final research project landed like an ember in the underbrush and set his field of psychology ablaze. So this just kind of talks about his life, where he started in graduate school and so on. As a young professor, he liked to close out each semester by performing as a mentalist. At the end of these little mentalism performances, he would stress how easily people can be fooled into believing things they've witnessed as paranormal phenomena. Though later on he meets this guy and who tells him that the evidence for ESP is actually quite strong. They talk about a lot of stuff that needs to happen for ESP to work. This is a whole long story. So in 1983, he makes an audit of one of this guy's experiments and finds out that they seem to be airtight. He starts to reconsider his thoughts about ESP. This woman, Jade Wu, who's helping out, was asked to look at the images that were going to be arousing. Naked men with poofy mullets and naked girls with feathered hair. Apparently Bem is gay, so he doesn't know what's sexy for heterosexuals. She didn't think his porno pictures were hot. Yeah, sure, they're erotic. Okay, I feel like this is maybe a flaw in the paper. If your erotic pictures aren't actually erotic, that could be a problem. Bem's reason for selecting porn or erotic imagery was he figured that if people did have ESP, it would have been an adaptive trait, a sixth sense that they acquired from ancient origins, likely be attuned to our most ancient needs and drives. Once Bem's paper was published, this guy, Wagenmaker, says he recalls reading it made me physically unwell. This guy is a research methodologist. So this guy noticed that there was no clear dividing line between exploratory and confirmatory phases. There was a bunch of different ways that he could have taken the data on the ESP or the erotic picture study. There's too many different ways to slice the data, which can lead to different outcomes or conclusions. So it sounds like he had started and stopped a bunch of different pilot testing studies. A bunch of things got started and then discarded. He didn't mention the other forks. So in the paper he published, he didn't mention the other pilot studies he had started and stopped in the research process. He was always making lots of tweaks to his experiments. He would adjust the number of trials and the timings of the stimuli. He didn't keep very close track of the ones he had discarded or the ones he hadn't. So this person, Lee Ross, feels like it's pretty much exactly the same as any kind of other conventional psychology analysis. The same failings and concerns that most research has. So this paper is not abnormal in that basically all of it has been done correctly. The difference is that the conclusions or like the subject is controversial. So this guy, Ross, made his name as a psychologist by demonstrating that people often cling to their beliefs in the face of any challenge, no matter how profound. Bem's paper is of particular interest to him. So this guy, Wagenmaker, drafts a rebuttal. Something is deeply wrong with the way experimental psychologists design their studies and report their statistical results. So Bem posts his response to Wagenmaker's piece, but then says the real test will come through replication. The whole point of this exercise is to be replicated. The holy grail of ESP research. If he can get his mainstream colleagues to run the studies for themselves, they'll find the same results and he'll be vindicated once and for all. There were some replication failures, but there were also replication successes. So this guy, Shimmick, is frustrated by everybody's just kind of like acceptance of Bem's paper and results, even though he believes that the results were clearly fudged. So he sets out to write a rebuttal. So apparently, in 2011, a survey of more than 2,000 psychologists found that more than half of the researchers admitted to using dodgy methods in their research. So to kind of underline their point, these three guys I mentioned earlier had a bunch of undergrads listen to the Beatles, the song When I'm 64, and then used statistical shenanigans to make it seem as though the music had made the students several years younger than they were before the song started playing. This little prank study was on the front page of the New York Times. This is kind of a turning point for social psychology. Their work has been cited nearly 1,000 times in 380 different journals. Bem showed that even smart and rigorous scientists could cart himself to crazyland just by following the rules of the road. It's not a matter of poor judgment, it's one of flawed mechanics. The results Bem published helped release his store of pent-up energy. This woman from the beginning, Jade Wu, wonders whether Bem planned this out from the start. She thinks that he might have done all of this as a way to make plain the problems of statistical methodology and psychology. Bem was asked if he'd ever budge on his belief in ESP. He doubts you could get him to totally switch religions. He's all for rigor, but he prefers if other people do it. He doesn't have the patience for it. Bem used the word replication 33 times in his paper. Even as he made the claim for precognition, he pleaded for its review. Credit to Bem. He's a smart, interesting person. He meant to satisfy the skeptics, but in the end he did the opposite. He energized their doubts and helped incite a dawning revolution. He conceded that this was the case, but he'd rather they started to believe in psi as well. I'd rather they remember my work for the ideas. Poor Bem. Okay, so I was kind of hoping that this would be a video about like the actual study itself and more about like the ESP interesting methodologies, but it went in an interesting direction. Let me know what you think in the comments if you feel like psi is real, if it's not, or just talk about how science is broken. Psychology in particular. This doesn't really talk about like things like chemistry or engineering or any of the other sciences. So this is kind of like I didn't realize that the replication crisis was specific to psychology. So anyways, I think that's about it for this video. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.